Hello and welcome to ATARC's webinar series. Today, topic experts will share strategies that agencies can implement in order to alleviate the concern of the unknown and make operations more efficient. My name is Kirsten Patton, and I will be moderating today's panel. ATARC stands for the Advanced Technology Academic Research Center, and we are a nonprofit that facilitates collaboration between government, industry, and academia in order to accelerate technology modernization initiatives. We provide ongoing opportunities for cross-agency collaboration through on-site interaction, learning, and market research. I would like to welcome all of our attendees and a special thanks to Roydson and the entire Symphony AI team. This afternoon, we are going to hear from our panelists, which will be followed by a Q&A session, and we will pop in a few polls and answer your questions. Before we begin, I just want to encourage you all, the audience, to please submit your questions in the Q&A section of this platform below. And also, if you'd like to receive CPE credit for attending, please make sure that you answer all poll questions in order to do so. And with that, I would like to welcome our panelists to please come on camera, and we will begin with a round of introductions. All right, Jim, would you like to kick us off, please?
Yes, thank you, Kirsten. And I just want to thank ATARC for inviting me to participate in your event. I am the director for BSA AML policy with the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency. And the OCC is responsible for supervising and examining approximately 1,000 or a little more than 1,000 national banks throughout the United States and globally. Approximately 70% of all banking assets are held by national banks, including many of the largest mega banks. So again, our focus at the OCC is bank examination and compliance with laws and regulations. We also take enforcement actions to ensure that our banks take corrective actions when deficiencies are identified.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Jim. Happy to have you here. And let's hear from Roy next, please.
Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning to you on the West Coast. My name is Roydson. I'm currently the acting special agent in charge of the Secret Service's Jacksonville field office. And I also have the collateral duty of being the service's National Pandemic Fraud Recovery Coordinator. The service, if you don't know, most of us know us as protecting the president, vice president, and heads of state, but we actually do a whole different side of that. We have a dual role as investigating financial crimes, or everybody says cybercrime now. So we are heavily involved in that when we're not doing our protection thing. I currently oversee all criminal investigations and oversee the North Florida Cyber Fraud Task Force. I've been in law enforcement a little over 30 years, 20 years with the service. Been doing complex financial investigations for about 25 years. With that, we've learned a lot in 30 years. Come a long way, of course, in how we investigate cases. And, I would just say that one of the things that I'm excited about here is obviously just to learn from, my other panelists, but also if you have any great questions. I'm out in the field. I'm doing cases up at 5 a.m. this morning doing search warrants. So we're out there trying to make a difference. But there's a lot of stuff going on.
Thank you, Roy. And let's hear from Simon next.
Thanks very much. It's great to meet everybody. Jim, I was up at 5 this morning as well, being shouted at by somebody in London, so no one else invited to yours. It's a pleasure to be on the panel with both you and Jim, and thanks everybody for joining us and investing the time to let us talk a little bit. I'm the CEO of IASD. some of you might know me as the CEO and founder of a company called Mantis about 20 years ago that began to build a set of rules to start finding criminal behavior. Yazdi has decided to invest. We took the firm over a couple of years ago, and really it was an oncological research, pharmaceutical research business that worked very closely with DARPA. And we took all of those models and started a project during COVID, which said we wanted to decode the financial crime genome to find the new biomarkers of incredibly agile, well-funded and extremely creative adversaries that were arbitraging the banking community on a global basis. I won't talk too much about Yazdi, apart from, we believe we have a breakthrough. Our customers are increasing the effectiveness of their discovery several orders of magnitude, and at the same time reducing this horrendous false positive problem that everybody tries to solve by an order of magnitude as well. So don't focus at the symptom, the false positives, focus at the disease, actually finding crime. And that's what Yazdi's been doing, really focusing very much at money laundering, terrorist financing and narco economy. We've moved into the more heinous human activities in human trafficking, slavery and pedophilia. We've just also now moving into internal fraud and payment fraud. And we're beginning to dip our toes into this fascinating decentralized finance market and crypto, which I think is a challenge for us all, not the existing financial markets, but it is a whole new financial market with an enormous disintermediation problems for the existing banks, but also some significant opacity for how we are going to be able to discover and interdict criminals who seek to either undermine a system or to exploit the system for their own criminal ends. So that's me. I look forward to a robust conversation, and thanks again for inviting me.
Thanks, Simon. And we're definitely going to get into the cryptocurrency here shortly. But Roy, I was going to start with you on our first question. What has been the impact of the explosion of cyber crimes in recent years, and how it's shaped your agency's priority for investigation?
Well, I can definitely say that there's been a major shift in, doing cybercrime investigations. I come from the old days when you followed the money on a paper trail. And so we've obviously we've fast forwarded quite a bit, and we continue to fast forward quickly. But cybercrime is probably the top priority of our agency, and what we do day to day, whether that's a business email compromise, a ransomware, an investment opportunity, an ICO for crypto, whatever the flavor of the day is. And so it has definitely been something that has come to the forefront for us. I saw a recent report from PricewaterhouseCoopers. They did a survey of corporations and found that cybercrime was their top threat now, as opposed to customer-based fraud. So it's definitely skyrocketing. Here at the service, just to try to manage this, particularly during the last 2 years with pandemic fraud, we've seen enormous increase in the amount of cyber-enabled fraud, just based on the processes there. We created a global investigative operations center, kind of a command center during this time period, just because of the overall activity. We created a cryptocurrency section because of the use of that during the pandemic. Not that it wasn't happening before, we've seen it majorly ramped up during the COVID fraud period.
Oh, thank you. And Jim, I was going to ask you the same thing. What have you noticed over at your agency, the impact of the explosion of cybercrime?
Well, the AML Act of 2020 required that FinCEN issue law enforcement priorities, or actually, I think the terminology is AML CFT priorities. And FinCEN was required to issue those priorities by June 30th of last year, which they did. And the priorities that FinCEN issued under the AML Act include cybercrime. And they defined it pretty broadly to essentially include any illegal activity that involves a computer, another digital device, or a computing network. Within the definition, they also, included ransomware. COVID-19 cybercrime was also highlighted to alert, banks and financial institutions, to the prominent trends and typologies and potential indicators. And essentially, this AML Act framework is a significant change in how financial institutions, including how the examiners, are going to, evaluate banks, systems for reporting suspicious activities and their BSA compliance programs. The AML Act also requires that FinCEN revise its regulations to require that banks' compliance programs reflect these priorities. And so this is a wholesale new approach to BSA AML compliance. Interestingly, the way the AML Act was structured, it required that FinCEN issue these priorities before the FinCEN and the federal banking agencies issue their new regulations to incorporate the priorities. So on June 30th of last year, what we did was simultaneously with the issuance of the priorities, the federal banking agencies issued what we referred to as the day one statement, just to assure financial institutions that nothing has changed, that their existing processes remain in effect, that both FinCEN and the regulators will be revising our compliance program rules, and until the effective date of those rules, banks are not required to do anything. However, the day one statement did recommend that banks, take a look at the priorities and evaluate them against their existing programs and their risk assessments. And then it also noted that we would not be examining, obviously, for these priorities until until the effective date of our rules. And we've been working very hard in revising our BSA compliance program rules. And we're hoping to get a notice of proposed rulemaking with questions to the industry shortly. And we encourage everybody to take a look at these rules. This is an enormous undertaking, a significant undertaking. It's the first time the BSA compliance program rules are being changed in nearly 50 years, maybe 40 years. They came out in 1986. So this is a major change, and we're really encouraging folks to take a close look at the questions that we're going to be raising, and please provide comments, because your comments are invaluable in these rulemaking processes.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you for sharing that with us, Jim. And Simon, I want to ask you next about cryptocurrency, but first let's just take a quick pause and put up our first poll question. This poll question is going to be around biggest challenges in criminal investigations that your organization faces. The options include lack of skilled manpower, increase in cybercrime, increase in crypto crime, or greater need for international collaboration. So if you're at home, please go ahead and answer that. I see some answers pouring in, which is awesome. We'll give that another minute here.
That doesn't seem very fair when Jim, Roy, and I are not allowed to answer that question. I just tried.
Simon, how would you answer it if you could? Skills, I think. Just to reinforce, I'm with Jim on this. It's fantastic that BSA is finally actually looking at the challenges that
that the modern world is giving. You know, we're looking at transaction monitoring systems that most banks are using that were built 5 years before the iPhone, looking for crimes from the 1980s and 1990s. You know, we all need to step up. Our adversaries are incredibly agile, incredibly well funded, and you know, I think it's fantastic that the BSA is changing, that it will act as a foundational component for innovation to allow us all to catch up. I think it's critical for the system, critical.
Well, and it looks like our audience agrees with you too about lack of skilled manpower. So,
but if I could just address what Jim just said and Roy just said on the cyber side of things, we run into that as well, but it's not actually as sophisticated a challenge as many people think. You know, there's some pretty rudimentary stuff that culturally should be put into an institution. Like, you shouldn't do things online that you wouldn't do when you're in your personal life. You know, being able to expose yourself to extortion is
did we lose
extraordinary. And basic CIO disciplines, basic IT disciplines around information security and making sure that passwords and just really rudimentary stuff is not a regulatory demand. That's just a good business hygiene requirement that I think that a lot of firms need to look really hard in the mirror and say, you know, we need to do this properly. We need to, as a culture, to take the integrity of our institution and our individual employees much more seriously than perhaps we have done in the past.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you, Simon. And so,
did you lose me? Sorry.
No, we heard. You glitched for a second, but we got you. We got the response.
Cheap internet.
So Simon, can you then please describe how the growth in the use of cryptocurrency may have made financial investigations more complex?
Well, I wouldn't want to be Roy and Jim. Is probably the first way I'd start that. You know, if you look at the trajectory of adoption of cryptocurrencies and decentralized finance, it is quite remarkable. You draw two lines. The first line is the adoption of the internet in the early 2000s, and the second line is the adoption of cryptocurrencies at the moment, and they're almost exactly the same. The adoption curve is extraordinary. Now, the interesting question, though, is that this is a whole new financial system. This isn't a financial system. A lot of the regular banks, a lot of the fiat banks, they're messing around with it. They're setting up little groups to have a look at it. They're bringing in some young whippersnappers to look at it. But really, they're looking at crypto as these youngsters with their marijuana and their surfboards, and they're not taking it as serious as they should be. And what we're seeing is we are seeing a very significant evolution of a new financial system. Now, will it disintermediate the existing financial system? I don't know. Will it do the same as what the internet did to the retail industry or to the music industry? I don't know. But what I do know, and I think this is a quandary for the regulatory teams as they think this through, is it is a whole new demographic that is using this technology. It isn't the middle class, suburban banking customers. It's young, it's minorities, it's women, it's individuals with poor credit, because the integrity of the system is not managed by the intermediary, in other words, the bank or the exchange. It's actually managed by the participants. And that's the critical point, that crypto is a peer-to-peer relationship rather than an intermediary-based relationship. We're beginning to see, you know, lots and lots of individuals who have never been part of the financial system now actively involved with it. So three observations on that. Number one, the regulators need to get a clear understanding of the trajectory of these currencies, not just cryptocurrencies, but the whole decentralized finance trend that we're beginning to see, even the asset side on NFTs. The second is they have to put regulations in place to ensure transparency. You know, if we look at, you know, particularly the privacy-based coins like Monero, completely bypass any KYC requirements. And so, you know, if you want to go on a dark web and you want to buy a machine gun, you're certainly not going to buy it with Ethereum, because it's probably an FBI sting. But if it's priced in Monero, hey, that's probably a real deal. And so there's some significant challenges around the KYC element on who is getting involved with it. The second is we're beginning to see a shift away from centralized exchanges, which did have some transparency, that did have some solid KYC, to these decentralized like DYDX and Uniswap, in which the whole concept of understanding who the beneficiary and who the originator is extremely opaque. And so, what we're looking at is we're looking at, truly a wild west of innovation in the development of different ways for peer-to-peer financial transactions. The blockchain has been very good at being able to establish a trusted, trustless environment, but we are seeing an explosion of new ideas and as a result, highly creative ways of criminal activity. And the analysis that we've been running with our customers are really two areas, and I think it's a part of a maturation curve. The first is the US dollar is still the money launderer's preferred currency. End of story. And so entering into the crypto markets, you're going to use US dollars largely. The challenge, however, is then exiting the crypto market. There isn't still a lot of things to buy with cryptocurrencies. And so there's a real liquidity issue in saying, okay, I'm a billionaire in cryptocurrency. What can I buy with it? Maybe some longboards. I don't really know. There isn't a great deal that you can spend on it. But as crypto becomes more adopted, it'll get much more interesting to financial criminals. And so the large degree of crime that we're seeing within the crypto markets is actually within the ecosystem itself. Ponzi schemes, exploitation of less sophisticated individuals, fraud, extortion, not necessarily the criminal activities that we're seeing in the fiat markets, but that is going to change. But it does allow us as a community, regulators, financial technology companies, financial institutions, to get ready to say, all right, how are we going to be able to manage and control this and establish the transparency that we need? So a ton of innovation happening, enormous adoption happening. The primary crimes are within the ecosystem between the participants themselves, because there is no intermediary. But as the liquidity or the ability to use cryptocurrencies increases, in other words, the consumability of it, we are going to see a lot more activity moving away from the traditional fiat asset classes into crypto to support laundering and the narco economy. We're not there yet. And I think that gives us a very significant window to define how we're going to get ready for this.
Thank you, Simon. And Roy or Jim, feel free to weigh in on my initial question too, if you would like.
Sure, I'll jump in there for a minute. Yes, so I mean, it's definitely made it more complex in the fact of a couple reasons. I hate to say it, but federal law enforcement and law enforcement in general is usually behind the curve a little, always. And our criminals are more than willing to adopt new technologies and money laundering tools way before we kind of, get the message. And especially like Simon said, with younger criminals, they're going to be using this more frequently. And so, we've seen that shift. And what that causes for us is we have to get our investigators, particularly our more experienced, we'll call them that, investigators, the old timers, we have to get them trained up, which is no small feat. And then the other thing that I see that's somewhat issue is dated legislation that causes us some issues when trying to, let's say, get subpoena or legal action or information from a crypto exchanger or a mixer, or those kind of things are trying to, some of the language that's out there doesn't quite cover that and they don't accept it. And even Congress fights with that. So I think there's definitely needs to be some changes there in order to allow us to have better investigative tools in order to try to get information on individuals and what they're doing in that ecosystem.
Thank you. Let's go ahead and pop up our second poll question having to do with cryptocurrency as well. What has been the impact of cryptocurrency transactions on your criminal investigations? So please take a moment there. Responses include crypto transactions have made our investigations more complex. They're easier to track than traditional transactions, or we have not seen so much impact so far. And take a moment to respond. Then we will move on to my next question. This time I was going to start off with Jim as well. So this is moving more into staffing or guidance for examiners. Jim, how is your agency planning to ramp up staffing or guidance to examiners in order to enforce the new and unprecedented international sanctions on Russia?
Well, with regard to the Russian sanctions and enforcement, the OCC, OFAC is the agency that's essentially enforcing its sanctions, and the OCC examines banks for compliance, with OFAC sanctions requirements, and ensuring that banks have OFAC compliance programs in place. We also have an MOU with OFAC that's been in place for many years that requires the OCC to report deficiencies that we identify during the examination process to OFAC. And the OCC will refer OFAC matters requiring attention that are cited in the examination reports to OFAC, and under the terms of the MOU, we will also provide OFAC with additional information concerning those deficiencies on their request. The OCC and the other FBA examiners apply the examination standards and procedures that are set forth in the FFIEC BSA AML examination handbook. But even though OFAC is a separate regime from the Bank Secrecy Act, there is some overlap. And FinCEN has put out some specific guidance with requests with regard to OFAC. Some of the guidance that they've provided basically covers whether or not SARs need to be filed whenever there is a blocking report filed with OFAC. And the FinCEN guidance basically covers that scenario. And generally, if the information is contained in the blocking report, then a SAR filing is not required. But if there is additional information not contained in the blocking report, then the bank should consider filing a SAR under those circumstances. And then FinCEN also recently put out 2 alerts on sanctions evasion that contains some red flags for banks to consider, and also encourages banks to file SARs in the case of situations where Russian sanctions are being evaded with specific information or language concerning that particular SAR that should be included in the SAR narrative. So both of those alerts also contain various red flags for banks to consider.
Thanks, Jim. And Roy, would you like to respond to that question as well?
Sure. I mean, the service, we conduct cybercrime investigations across the globe. That's nothing new. And a lot of our investigations of transnational organized groups end up, just happen to be in Eastern Europe. So, in those groups. So we're not going to change, or ramp up our staffing in a way to change what we're doing. We are obviously, one thing that I think the service has done in federal law enforcement in general has done, we've gotten a lot more proactive than reactive in the last several years, of course. So we are out trying to find cases, whether that's, working with FinCEN or, different groups and developing those investigations, those cases that could lead back, to particular countries in Eastern Europe, including Russia.
Thank you. And Jim and Roy, another question for you came in through the audience is, how does the Federal Reserve System work with Treasury and Secret Service in the process of containing financial crime? Is that a relationship that you guys could speak to?
Yeah, the Federal Reserve, is included as one of the federal banking agencies. And so they are intimately involved with the OCC, FDIC, and FinCEN, in creating policies with regard to AML and CFT compliance. They also have examination teams that examine holding companies and as well as state member banks for compliance with AML CFT. So yes, we work hand in hand with the Federal Reserve in setting many of these policies and in implementing all of these AML Act requirements and working with FinCEN and consulting with FinCEN under the terms of the AML Act. So yeah, so the AML, the Federal Reserve plays a huge role.
And Roy, how about at the Secret Service?
We do have obviously cases that we work with them, and it kind of goes back to what Jim said. Sometimes that's where there's possibly a compliance issue with a financial institution, or we're not seeing eye to eye on certain things that we're trying to investigate for one man or another. And whether that's, through the regulators getting involved or, just a determination on what the financial institution is doing or not doing in the AML world, we usually are able to get that process up and running. And that partnership has been valuable in that situation where we might, especially when we're talking in this day and age, when we have, third-party payment systems, fintechs and different things that are out there that they can, somewhat help us with. They've been more than helpful on numerous investigations, particularly during pandemic fraud. They've given the financial institutions a lot of guidance as we've all tried to manage through this storm.
Thank you. And thank you, Angela, for submitting your question. And Simon, I was going to queue up another one for you, but is there been anything said so far you'd like to weigh in on or further comment?
Oh, I think that Roy and Jim are the experts in those two areas. We've looked very hard at stimulus fraud. It feels to a large degree that the horse has bolted, and it's a recovery issue now. The way it was executed, it was executed in a rush, completely understandably, and that left a lot of us all behind to sort of say, okay, well, there has been an enormous amount of both organized, but more specifically opportunistic fraud. And that's a tough thing to recover on. So, it's a very, very, very difficult challenge. And I think we're just going to end up writing off a boatload of taxpayers' money because of the way it was managed and the way it was executed. But, hopefully lessons learned for the future.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So Simon, then how do you think AI and ML learning can help you go beyond the capabilities provided by traditional sanction monitoring?
Well, it's not just sanction monitoring. It is an opportunity to transform the efficacy of the whole financial crime discovery model. I think that it was Roy that was saying that we're always behind the curve, and we are, and we shouldn't be. We collectively as a system should be proactively ahead of financial criminals and innovating new ideas to discover malfeasant behaviors, whether they be fraud, whether they be internal malfeasance, whether they be laundering. We have an opportunity with the use of AI and machine learning. Unfortunately, it's had a bad start. Everybody suddenly became an AI company or a machine learning company, but really they were just a business intelligence company, or they were a consulting firm with a couple of data scientists. And frankly, when Gartner said 85% of AI projects failed a couple of years ago, they were right. And there is an understandable degree of cynicism, but there are several innovators, and I'm not going to mention any of them apart from a Yazdi, because they can do their own marketing, that really have innovated something imperative in highly regulated markets. Now, we come from the as we said, oncological pharmaceutical market, as well as from the intelligence community. And so if we tell somebody they've got cancer, we bloody well better know what we're talking about, and we better know that it can be fully explained. And so when I talk to, if one of my customers calls up one of their clients and say, hey, we're not doing business with you anymore because you're a bloody crook, again, we better be able to explain that to an incredibly intimate level. And so it isn't necessarily, Kirsten, the onslaught of AI and machine learning. It is the acceptance of regulatory proof in the use of higher order technologies. And there are really three that should be looked at. Classic AI in discovery, not looking for a needle in a haystack. That's easy. Anybody can do that. But looking for a needle in a stack of needles, looking for behaviors that are deliberately trying to look the same as everybody else. And that's really where Yazdi has really built a whole new definition on the area of discovery of criminal behavior. And the breakthroughs we have, we are discovering crime 50 to 80 times more than the traditional models they have. The second is solving the symptom of bad discovery, which is the false positives. So, these poor banks, their current systems have about a 99% inaccuracy rate, so about 1% in discovering crime. So the rest of it is false positives, but they're regulated correctly to say you need to actually investigate all of this stuff. So enormous operational costs. That is a symptom of a problem. The problem is you're not discovering the crimes as effectively as you want to. And so the rule systems that are being used, because they are apparently very explainable, they're if-then mathematics, fairly straightforward, have always had a clear lead in saying to the regulator, we're fully explainable. But the new AI engines are more explainable, and more importantly, the efficacy of discovery is a couple of orders of magnitude greater than what they were in the past. So we can now call somebody a criminal and say, and this is why. And here's all the referential and tertiary data to support it. And here's all the behaviors that you have that indicate it. And that is a very significant breakthrough in the discovery of not just crime, but also on the other side on the discovery of alpha. The second is robotic process automation, or RPA. In the end, good old-fashioned, hard investigative work is needed to ensure that what is going to be said to the client or the regulator is substantial. And that does require investigation flow. And RPA is beginning to replace a lot of the monotonous, hard data acquisition, data assimilation processes, and put in a consistency into the way the investigation is run, so that investigation doesn't need to be cobbled into a SAR, that it can be actually a very smooth relationship between the discovery, the investigation, and the FinCEN notification. And then the third area is really looking at a lot more on the KYC side, so sanctions comes in, on really identity and facial identity. KYC has been a radical problem for financial institutions since the day they started. They're no real better at the moment, and they're spending enormous amounts of money on doing that. But a lot of new facial recognition solutions, a lot of new digital tracking solutions, a lot of new areas, indeed, that are often coming out of the blockchain innovation areas, are definitely helping on how Simon Moss is actually Simon Moss. And so those three areas, stronger KYC on identity management, much infinitely better discovery techniques, and RPA to streamline investigations are doing two things. One, they're increasing the transparency of the financial crime unit. They're able to focus on more criminal behaviors and discover those behaviors much more efficiently, much more cost effectively than they have in the past. And two, they can begin to stop inundating FinCEN with defensive SARs. And they can begin to start saying, actually, this SAR is relevant and important. And therefore, when the OCC comes in or the FTC comes in, what is being generated by this business unit is actually valuable for the system, rather than providing essentially air cover for the financial investigation unit's regulatory audit. That was an incredibly long answer, but I hope it was interesting.
That was great. Thank you, Simon. Jim, did you have anything additional you'd like to add to that question or the response that Simon just proposed?
Yeah, Simon kind of hit on the three big AML areas where AI can have a huge impact. I also wanted to just point out that the OCC issued interpretive letter number 1166 that permitted a national bank to use advanced technologies and completely automated processes to file structuring SARs. Now, structuring SARs, are SARs that are typically filed for, transactions under $10,000. So we're talking low dollar amounts. And structuring is a defined term. So it was pretty, easy for the bank to, create automated processes to identify structuring transactions. And then ultimately, the bank was using natural language processing systems to populate both the SAR and the SAR narrative. So basically took the entire structuring SAR process out of the hands of the SAR investigators and fully automated them. And in our letter, we kind of laid out some guardrails that the bank had to comply with to ensure that they didn't violate the law, as well as some sound corporate governance procedures and ongoing testing requirements to ensure that their automated systems were working appropriately. And this had a huge impact. Structuring SARs are one of the largest categories of SARs in the FinCEN database. And so I just wanted to just point out that interpretive letter 1166 because it's really significant and supports banks using advanced technologies in these areas. And interestingly, when Congress ultimately passed the AML Act of 2020 and it was enacted, Section 6204 and 6202 actually basically incorporate some of the OCC's thinking in that interpretive letter. And there are SAR streamlining provisions in the AML Act that FinCEN is required to consider, as well as streamlining specific to structuring transactions. It was terrific to see Congress actually incorporating those type provisions in the AML Act. And there is so much in this act that the SAR provisions will likely come after the program rule components that I earlier referenced and alluded to. But there are going to be some significant changes coming down the pipeline. Ultimately, once the AML Act is fully implemented.
If I could just jump in on that as well, I think Jim is right, and I think Jim, you know, what we've seen over the last couple of years is, you know, a pushback on the use of AI because of a fear of the discovery of crimes that the old steam engines, the old rules engines did not discover, and then notifying the regulator of that and being pinged for it to say, well, you should have caught it. The relationship has changed. The regulators are now saying, we're not going to penalize you if you adopt new technologies because we understand the deficiency of the old technologies. So go ahead and discover it, and we won't penalize you for it. And that has been incredibly important for the adoption and at least the trial of these technologies. And I want to thank the OCC and the FDIC, and I think you all got together and said, we've got to give these guys a chance to innovate themselves. And I think that is really beginning to get this adoption curve really driving forward aggressively.
Can I make a quick point?
Of course.
All right. So from the investigative side out in the field, you know, how AI is helping us, it's no surprise to anybody, you know, the amount of data that we have flowing in and the massive data that we have from the simplest, smallest cybercrime case. Taken point this morning, small little 2-person counterfeit check operation, running it out of their house. And we went in, you know, 10 electronics, you know, and everybody has their whole life on their electronics. And so we take those, we digest that, and we're talking literally could be hundreds of thousands, if not millions of records that we have to sift through. Looking at, again, back to stimulus fraud, I hate to keep bringing that up, but we're talking billions of records that we have to try to, you know, cipher through. Well, we can't. And thanks to the advancements of AI and machine learning, we're able to develop some very good criminal leads that we'll be able to follow up on that normally law enforcement just wouldn't have the capabilities of doing if not for AI and other advanced investigative tools. So, you know, it gives us a better chance of working cases faster, identifying suspects quicker, and that could, you know, help us to possibly apprehend people that we might not have the chance because of the time delay and actually, you know, investigating and going through that data, you know, traditionally or like we used to do in the past.
Thank you. And just as a reminder to the audience, we're coming up on time. So if you do have any pressing questions, send them in now. Otherwise, it might be too late. But with that said, let's go ahead and pop up our third poll question here. How do you support the need for financial investigations as part of your overall criminal investigations? Please choose all that apply, which include we address this need using in-house finance specialists, we use other agencies and third parties to meet this need, or financial investigations are not a big part of our criminal investigations. Please go ahead and respond to that. And then Roy, I want to cue you up for our last question that we have here on the docket. Do you have adequate in-house technical expertise in areas such as data science to help you take advantage of AI and ML learning or machine learning? I don't know why I said that.
It's okay. Well, we are the federal government. So we are getting better. We're extremely limited. I would say that we have it's very difficult for us to hire experienced data scientists, forensic accountants, those in those different fields that would be very beneficial to us. You know, the federal government pays what the federal government pays, which is, you know, 3 or 4 times less than in the public sector. And so that makes it really difficult. You know, and what we see too is when we bring on people early in their careers, after 3, 4, 5 years, again, the public sector comes calling, and in no fault of theirs, they have to accept, you know, that ability to move up and to get a higher salary. So we lose a lot of people in that area. Our retention is tough. We do have data scientists. We do have a forensic accountants. Some of those are in-house, some of those are third-party contractors. So we do have those capabilities, but it is an uphill climb. I mean, we find ourselves going out and actually recruiting in the colleges and universities, trying to get them at a young age, hoping that they'll want to serve their country or get excited about working federal law enforcement investigations. And we get them in here and we try to get them acclimated, whether that's in an internship or, as we call them a pathway student as they're in college. We try to get them in here and get them acclimated, get them experience, and see if we can get them to want to have a career with us for an extended period of time. So yeah, it's an uphill climb for us. We're getting better at it, but we're extremely short in that area.
And Roy, too, a question for you that came in is, what problem would you like to see solved with AI at the Secret Service?
So there's a couple different things. Obviously, again, I was kind of talking about just massive data. The cases that we work, the records and trying to, find the needle in the stack of needles, as Simon said, so that we can get ahead of the curve. I'm a big proponent of being proactive instead of reactive. And so that's what I would love to see, so that we can, somewhat be on the same playing field as our more complex cyber criminals. So that would give us a leg up. And then, there is different AI that I'd love to see in, talking about on our protective side. Obviously, we have a lot of threats and a lot of known threats that we could probably make sure that we secure, locations better, or the possibility of dangerous events happening if we could utilize AI in order to identify possible suspects.
Thank you. And Jim, back to my original question, and then Simon will bounce to you next. But again, do you have adequate in-house technical expertise in areas such as data science to help you take advantage of AI and ML?
Yeah, the OCC. We've been involved with bank examinations and modeling, for many years. In fact, we put out the model risk management guidance back in 2012. We've put out additional guidance in the use of alternative data and credit underwriting in 2019. We put out guidance specific to model risk management for Bank Secrecy Act systems with the other agencies in 21. And then also we just put out model risk management guidance examination procedures. We've been involved for many years in examining banks for these kinds of systems. With regard to AI, about 6 months or so ago, we put out a request for information with the other federal banking agencies to get a better idea of what banks are doing in this space. And we identified 4 or 5 main issues based on the responses that we received, and thanks to anybody out there that did provide their responses. They were very helpful. But the main areas that we're now focusing on at the OCC include the issue of explainability, the data and data integrity, how that has an impact on AI. Information security is obviously also a big issue here, because AI uses a lot of data, and protecting that data is paramount. Equity and fairness and inherent biases that could exist in some of the models can also create some significant problems for banks. And then third-party risk is also a big issue. We are also working with the other agencies in putting out some additional guidance in the area of third-party relationships, as we are seeing such an explosive growth in this space, especially with the fintechs and many many items are being outsourced these days that you really didn't see in the past, including things that traditionally were done in banks. Like check processing, for example. I mean, there's third parties doing that. Cash vault activities. We now have, third party cash vaulting going on out there. So yeah, this the third party risk guidance is going to be timely and very, very helpful. And then the other thing too is, we continually train our examiners in this area, and we also have an economics and risk analysis division within the OCC that's comprised of PhDs in finance, economics, and IT. And they also go out on bank examinations with our examiners and provide the requisite level of support and expertise as necessary in some of the more complex modeling examinations. So like I said, we've been involved in this for quite a while. We put out a lot of guidance in this space. And continue to ensure that our folks are getting the support and training that they need to maintain the level of expertise needed.
Thank you, Jim. And Simon, we'll end it with you before we do our final round of takeaways, but I also want to direct your attention to our last audience question. What are the data sources that would help in detecting these crimes, such as credit bureaus, public data? So Simon, if that's something you could speak to as well.
Yeah, first of all, I mean, Roy, that was just bloody depressing. That just is wrong. End of story. You guys are sticking burning spears into the hearts of bad people. You should have the best of the best that we have. It's really ridiculous. Jim, I agree with you. I think the OCC has a very strong level of intellectual horsepower in this area. The comment of bias isn't in the models, bias is in the data. So often when people come in and go, oh, what a wonderful system. By the way, to make the system work, can you make the data look this way? As soon as you do that, as soon as you start this death march of data homogenization into a certain look and feel for the data model, you've got bias in it already. And so, we're on our back foot as soon as you start. What we have to solve is to say, let the data tell us the story rather than force the data to tell the story that we want it to tell. And that's where all these innovations in unsupervised AI are coming out, which is incredibly interesting. As for the data sources itself, Kirsten, I think that's a very good question. Believe it or not, we've been on a journey of anti-money laundering, systemic anti-money laundering since the US Patriot Act. So we got about 20 years of homogenizing data fairly well. So, transaction data, customer data, asset class data. Most banks are in a fairly good position in the structure of the data they have. What they don't have is they don't have a good engine to interpret the criminality within that data. And so we're not looking at these massive data integration projects for new innovations. Most innovations now are going in between 3 and 6 months. The SaaS models or the SaaS engines are going in, in a few weeks. And so all this investment that we've made into anti-money laundering technology over the last 20 years actually does have a benefit. We've just got to upgrade the detection systems and the operational performance behind it, and the synergies between the individual banks and the regulators. That there should not be a confrontational relationship. We're all in this together. We're all facing this systemic risk. We should be able to leverage each other. And so I don't think data is as big a challenge as it was. It was enormously challenging. Now, on the investigation side, particularly in things like referential ownership, identity theft, shell companies, there still needs to be a lot of research. And I'm with Roy on this. The whole concept of natural language processing. Actually, I think it was Jim that talked about natural language processing to analyze huge amounts of unstructured data, including visual data, and then create some important conclusions out of that will be an area that can really help us all. So to summarize the answer, good old-fashioned traditional data requirements, the foundation of detection, customer, transaction, asset class. We're in a fairly good place. I have a caveat of correspondent banking, which is still a nightmare. Those bloody SWIFT reports are still, anemic, and we need to have more discipline around that. But but fundamentally, that's in a good place. The investigation is still heterogeneous, is still unstructured, is still pretty hard work. But there are technologies out there that can really streamline this much more effectively.
Thank you, Simon. And I want to hear from each of you guys, 30 seconds or less. What's a key takeaway from this conversation, or final, words that you want to impart upon our audience before we close out? Roy, let's start with you, please.
Sure. I'll probably steal some of Simon's thunder from earlier, but, just having good cyber hygiene can save you not only personally, but corporately. Pretty simple stuff, but it goes a long ways to keeping you out of a cyber incident. The service does a lot of cyber incident exercises with private and public corporations. And one of the main things we say is have a cyber incident plan, have a plan in place, know what you're going to do, how you anticipate that something is going to happen, be able to identify that problem, analyze it, and then act. And then, be willing to reach out to your federal law enforcement, because we're just here to assist. But again, just have a plan, but just that basic stuff of cyber hygiene, I think, goes a long ways. When we're talking about cyber-enabled crime, we can prevent a lot of it.
Excellent. Thank you. And let's bounce over to Jim next, please.
Sure. The OCC supports responsible innovation. We have an Office of Innovation, and we're one of the first agencies to develop an Office of Innovation, and we encourage and support banks' efforts in this space. I'd also just want to mention that our Deputy Controller for Operational Risk, Kevin Greenfield, just testified before the House Committee on Financial Services on artificial intelligence on Friday the 15th, so about 2 weeks ago. I'd encourage folks to take a look at his testimony, and there's a lot of good information in there as to what banks are doing, how the OCC is examining for AI, as well as how AI will ultimately be a part of our examination processes as well. So I encourage folks to take a look at that. And then I pointed out earlier the AML Act and some of the rulemakings that are going to be coming out. I just want to encourage folks to please participate in the rulemaking process. We really appreciate your comments. Thank you.
Thank you. And Simon, we'll end it with you.
Yeah, we're running over, so I won't babble like I was. Number one, I'm going to go to my data science team and say, hey, do you want an internship with the federal government for a couple of years? Roy, I bet you money, 50% of them will say, yeah, I'm really interested. I bet you money. Yeah. Secondly, I want to thank everybody for letting us talk. So I can talk about YASD and breakthroughs and how incredibly proud we are of what we're doing, but I want to say two things. Number one, we have to look, we as a system are threatened by our advisories, not as an individual bank, not as an individual regulator, not as a fintech. The system is attacked. And we need to work out a way in which we can work together better, how we can share information better, how we can, connect things together, because we're being arbitraged. A criminal doesn't attack one bank, they attack 20. They use different asset classes across them all. They build different relationships across them all. They're extremely creative in that. And I would say that we as a system need to work out how we collaborate and work together better, because I think we lost that. We had it in the early 2000s, post 9/11, but it's sort of fragmented after that. The second thing I would say is we are lucky at this point. We do have technologies that can catch and fill and bridge the gap between our adversaries and ourselves at this point. And we need to innovate more, and we need to try more. We can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. We can't say all these systems are rubbish, let's get rid of them, let's put new systems in. But I'm with Jim on this. We need to drive responsible innovation. We need to drive more parallel runs. We need to be able to see the delta between what has been done and what can be achieved. And we need to build our banks, our customers need to build a responsible roadmap with their regulators that says, this is how we can catch up our adversaries. Because if we can't catch them now in fiat, we've got a really, really difficult time ahead of us in this new crypto market with its new vernacular, its new dynamism, and its new opacity. So I think we've got time, but I think we've got to really start working out how we can innovate, how we can work together, and how we can collaborate as a system to fight these people who really do mean us not some very good things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you, Simon. And I want to thank our partners again at Symphony AI for helping us put this all together, and our audience, and of course our panelists for this incredible insights. So looking forward to doing it again sometime in the future. And final poll, CPE credit, do you want the CPE mailed to you? So with that, thank you all so much. I hope you have a great rest of your week, and don't forget to register for our next weekly webinar on June 2nd, this time around digital awareness, the key to a strong IT landscape. Bye, everyone.
Bye.